In the summer of 1986, I was about a month away from beginning my first church ministry. We were at a summer camp, and my wife and I were attending the evening service. There was a pastor who was preaching on the filling of the Holy Spirit. At the end of the sermon, I looked at my wife and I said, we have to go forward because we can't begin ministry without the filling of the Holy Spirit, without the empowerment of the Holy Spirit. And so we both went forward to the altar and we knelt there. And before we knew it, this man had come up and asked if he could pray with us. He began to pray, asking that God would fill us with the Holy Spirit. And he maybe prayed a minute, not much more than a minute. And then he announced, there, it's done. And I looked at him and I looked at my wife and I said, are you sure? I really believe there should be some evidence that a person had been filled with the Holy Spirit. A.W. Tozer said he had never met a man or a woman who'd been filled with the Holy Spirit and did not know it. Well, I didn't know it. I didn't feel it. 2 days later, my wife and I ended up in an argument, and she looked at me and said, nothing happened to you. And I agreed, and of course added, nothing happened to you either. And then we began to pray and ask God to fill us with His Holy Spirit. The Lord really used that because it created a hunger in us. It made us begin to search and desire, not for any particular gift or manifestation, but for more of God, for His empowering presence. Over the next few weeks and months, we started ministry, and there were good things happening in our church, but I knew there had to be more. In fact, I was very tired as I felt like we were doing most of our ministry in our own strength. And so around Christmas time, I remember saying to my wife, if there's not some more, if there's not more power somewhere, we can't do this. We have to quit and go do something that doesn't require this amount of effort. One of my elders came to me in January, and he showed me a brochure from a conference that was being held in California. And it was a conference on the present-day work of the Holy Spirit. We decided that I would make this trip and attend this conference. At that conference, I saw people loving God, worshiping, experiencing His presence in ways that I'd really never experienced myself. Through the week, I heard good biblical preaching. There was a strong emphasis on mission and empowerment for reaching the nations for the gospel of Christ. And I continued to grow in my hunger for God to do something new and fresh. There was a man who was also attending the conference, and he was a worker, a ministry worker at this church. And he kept coming up to me. He came up to me on the first night and he said, son, are you ready to be filled with the love of the Father? And I said, yes, that's why I'm here. And he looked at me and said, you're not ready, and walked away. And he came to me the next day and said the same thing. Do you want to be filled with the love of the Father? And I said, yes, that's why I'm here. And again, he shook his head and said, you're not ready, and walked away. And so with my hunger, my frustration was also growing, but I kept pressing in. I kept asking God to do everything He wanted to do. And so finally on Friday night, when they asked pastors to come forward who needed to be filled with the Holy Spirit, I think I ran to the front. And as I stood there, who showed up but this man? And he looked at me and he said, son, are you ready to be filled with the love of the Father? And as I looked at him and prepared to say yes, what came out of my mouth was just cries, and I started to sob. And he looked at me and he said, son, you're ready. And he put his arms around me and prayed that God would fill me with His Holy Spirit. And as I stood there, God met me in a powerful way. In Ephesians, it says that we're sealed by the love of His Spirit, and that's what it felt like God did in that moment. When I returned from that conference, there was a noticeable difference in my life, in my ministry, in my marriage. My wife noticed the difference, and she really liked it because I loved her more. I loved the people that God had called me to serve more. There was power in my preaching. We saw people begin to get healed and saved and set free from sins that had kept them bound for years. What I learned in that experience and in other experiences as God has met me and filled me again and again is that without the empowering of God's Holy Spirit, this ministry that we're called to is impossible.